Hello friends, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Stephanie. Today I'm going to show you how to make nutrient-rich bone broth from your Thanksgiving kitchen scraps. Today I'm going to show you two different ways that I make bone broth. The first way is using an Instant Pot. This is great if you are low on time or if you just have a small amount that you want to process. The other way I'm going to show you is using 18-quart roasters. These are perfect if you have multiple turkey carcasses left over from Thanksgiving, or if you have a lot of beef and pork bones or multiple chicken carcasses. You can make a whole lot of broth at one time, especially if you're looking to can your broth or just freeze a lot of it. The first way I'm going to show you is the Instant Pot. I have 2 chicken carcasses that are going in my Instant Pot. These are just rotisserie chickens that we use the meat for dinners, and then we save the bones to make this bone broth. So I'm adding my 2 chicken breasts to my Instant Pot. I'm adding about half a gallon bag of frozen vegetable scraps. I've got carrot, celery, onion, lots of onion peels for that rich color that they give. All of that's going in my pot. Everything that I'm doing in the Instant Pot, I'm going to also do in the roaster. In the roaster, I am using more vegetable scraps because I have 2 large turkey carcasses. So I'm using about 2 gallons of vegetable scraps that I've saved into that one. Whereas the Instant Pot, I'm only using about a half gallon of vegetable scraps. The Instant Pot will go much quicker. It'll only take about 2 hours to process the bones and the vegetable scraps into broth because it brings it up to high pressure, whereas the roaster is a low and slow method, but it produces a lot more broth. I'll get several gallons of broth from my 18-quart roaster, whereas in the Instant Pot, I'm going to get a little over a half gallon, 3/4 of a gallon, something like that. Both are excellent methods, just depends on the amount of bones and scraps you have and the amount of time you want to dedicate to it. I'm going to add enough water to cover the bones and the vegetable scraps. And then I'm going to go in with some seasonings. I like to go ahead and season my broth because sometimes if we're sick, like today, I do have a cold, so I am looking forward to using some of this broth to help me get to feeling a little bit better. I want that to be seasoned so I don't have to do anything to it when I warm it up. I'm going to get a little bit more water, but I'm also adding probably a teaspoon or 2 of salt. Adding some thyme. Few teaspoons, maybe a tablespoon of thyme. About the same of parsley. About 6 or so peppercorns. You can use black pepper if you don't have that. I did about 2 teaspoons of parsley, a couple teaspoons of thyme, 6 to 10 peppercorns, 2 teaspoons of salt, and I'm going to add some apple cider vinegar. Alright, just enough water that it's even with my vegetables. This is some apple cider vinegar. that I made from the apples I used for my apple pie canning video for that apple pie filling. So I'm going to use about 3 or 4 tablespoons or a really good splash of that. You want to add apple cider vinegar because it helps the bones release their collagen, and we really want as much collagen out of our broth as we can get. So you can see, I want to tip it there, you can see that the water level is about equal with my stock. I have one more thing I'm going to add. Last thing I'm going to add is a whole clove of garlic. I'm going to just smash this, but I'm leaving the skins on because they also add a whole lot of flavor. So I'm just going to use my rolling pin and smash this just like that. And then I'm just going to drop those cloves in, skins and all. Taking a spoon, I'm going to push all of that under the water. And if you need to adjust and add a little bit more, you can, but this is just about perfect. Okay, all done. This is going to go in my Instant Pot on soup mode for 2 hours. And then at that point, I'm just going to leave it on keep warm until I'm ready to strain it. So I have a lot going on today. I'm not going to get to this for a while, so it can hang out an entire day. It can hang out overnight, whatever you need it to do. Up to 36 to 48 hours is what I like to do. So no more than that really, but that gives you a lot of time to get to it. I'm going to put the lid on my Instant Pot and set the vent to sealing. And then I'm putting it on soup mode for 2 hours. Okay, 120 minutes. And then I'm going to make sure keep warm is lit up. Mine, I don't have to set that. Yours might be different. Just make sure that it's lit up where it's going to keep it warm. Mine usually keeps it warm for up to 18 hours without me doing anything. And I'll be back before then. So at this point, I'm completely done. In the 18-quart roaster, I'm doubling the seasonings of what I put in the Instant Pot, and I'm letting it cook on 250 for about 18 to 36 hours covered. So once your broth is done, you need a fine mesh strainer and a ladle. I'm also using a canning funnel just because it helps me not make as much of a mess. But I'm just going to put my fine mesh strainer on top of my canning funnel. And then I'm going to start straining off the liquid from my broth. Try to get a nice up close shot of the color. You can see how deep and rich brown that broth is. That's from the onion peels. Those add a lot of nice onion flavor, but also give that rich, deep color. So I'm just going to strain all of this broth. And then I'm going to let this cool on my counter until it's cool enough to put in the fridge. You want to refrigerate your broth because your broth still has a lot of fat in it from the chicken or turkey, whatever you're using. And you want to ladle off the fat. So as this sits in the refrigerator, the fat will all rise to the top and it'll solidify. So you can take a spoon and just scrape out the fat, and then you can proceed with canning it or freezing it. I'm going to show you a little clip of each method. I'm going to can my turkey broth and then freeze my chicken broth. Since this isn't going to make as much, I'm just going to freeze the chicken broth, and I'll show you how I do that. There's a handy tool that I use called a super cube, and it makes this super easy, and I'll show you that when it's time. don't know if that's gonna pick it up where you can see it, but there's already a little line right there of the fat that's rising to the top. But there's more that'll continue to rise, and now you want to make sure you get as much of that off as possible, especially if you're canning your broth. If you're canning your broth, you don't want it to be super fatty, because as your jars process, some liquid will inevitably come out, possibly siphon out, and you don't want the fat to get stuck between the jar lid and the jar and cause a false seal or cause them to not seal at all. But also your broth will just taste a little bit better if it's not got all of the fat in it. So this jar is completely full. I'm gonna go grab another one. Looks like I'm out of half-gallon jars, so I'm just gonna use this quart and see how far we get. If you can use a wide mouth, it's a lot easier when it comes time to scoop out the fat. All I've got is a regular mouth, but any of them will work. Last year I actually wanted to know if it was worth making my own broth, if I was actually saving money. I did the math and I would have saved about $30 in what I got from processing my own broth. And I ended up getting, I think it was a pound of meat and then 2 gallons of broth, and so the equivalent of all of that was $30. And of course last year grocery prices were less than they are now, so I'll be interested to see how much money I actually end up making from what I save this year. I'll try to update my blog post where I did the math last year to reflect this year's prices. When you get to the end, you may just have to pick up your pot and strain the remaining liquid off. Another trick that I use is to take these remaining solid pieces, and I'll actually put this in a colander over a bowl and catch any of the remaining broth. Like I mentioned, I'm gonna freeze the chicken broth that I made today in these super cubes. I've had these for probably 3 years now. Mine are 1 cup increments. So you can see it says 1 cup, and then the second line that's lower down says half a cup. So you can actually measure out whatever liquid that you're storing in here to go in the freezer. I use these to freeze soup in individual size portions and broth, anything that is liquid that you could freeze in 1 or half cup measurements. And then when they're frozen, they pop right out through the silicone, and you can store them in a freezer bag, or they come with a lid and you can just store them like this. I always put mine in a bag because you have a better chance of preventing freezer burn, but I have stored broth in these as well for 3 months and they were fine. I have 2 sets of these in the 1 cup because that's the increment that I use the most, and they stack on top of each other nicely, and I'll just slide those on the freezer shelf and let them freeze solid, and then I'll pop them in a labeled Ziploc bag. I'm ladling off the fat that's in this broth. There honestly wasn't much fat in this broth, so it didn't even solidify into a solid chunk. So I'm just skimming some of that off. I am putting this in my super cubes. I put a cup of broth into each, and then these will go in the freezer until they're solid, and then I can pop those pucks of broth out into a freezer safe gallon bag, and then I can reuse them again. I'm also canning some of the broth from my 18-quart roasters, so I'm going to pressure can the turkey broth. I will link the NCHFP's guidelines for meat stock in the description box below, but for turkey or chicken broth, you do have to get that broth back up to a simmer before you can it. So once I chill it and I remove the fat, I will warm it back up before I put it in my jars. Then I'm going to pressure can my quarts of hot broth for 25 minutes. You can see here I've got my jars in my canner ready to process. I'll run several loads of turkey broth in my canner until I have all of that canned up. I actually really prefer canned broth over frozen just because it's immediately ready to use, whereas if I have it frozen, I have to thaw it before I'm going to use it. So just for the ease of cooking, I really prefer pressure canning my broth. Either way you do it, you have a delicious, healthy bone broth that's going to support your gut and bone health. It's going to make your dishes taste even better because it has so much more flavor than regular store-bought broth. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you like this kind of content, please consider subscribing to our channel. You can also follow along with us on our blog, gardenofmirth.com, for more content about from scratch cooking, gardening, and keeping a cozy home. Until next time, see you later, friends.